Welcome. While we're waiting for folks to arrive, I'll share a few program notes. This talk will be recorded. We'll send an email out with the link and resources mentioned in today's presentation when the recording is available. I'm Kai Daly, Program Manager at 501 Secure. I'm your host and presenter for today. Thank you for joining me for Cybersecurity Awareness on a Shoestring, Practical Steps for Small Budgets. This talk explores the invisible scaffolding of the civic sector, the digital substrate of our work. While we measure impact through services provided, that work lives, at least in part, in the cloud, on shared platforms and databases, and also within the trust of the communities we serve. Today, that trust is under immense structural pressure from cyber attacks and tightening compliance standards. We're not going to talk about passwords or phishing. Instead, we're going to explore how a resource-strapped organization builds a culture of security and prioritizes defense against evolving threats. My goal for this talk is to reframe the concept of cybersecurity awareness and suggest sustainable, nonprofit appropriate solutions grounded in a case study of an organization that dared to try something different. So I'll pause here and tell you a bit about me and our program. I lead 501 Secure at the Piper Center for Nonprofit and Civic Impact, based out of the Mabel G. Ragland Institute here in Spokane, Washington. I've worked in nonprofit tech for a decade as IT consultant, IT program manager, and chief information security officer. And I've seen immense need for digital safety and awareness in our sector. Now in our third year, we've supported hundreds of nonprofit professionals from grassroots collectives to large regional institutions through free training and volunteer-led risk assessments. Our work is guided by 4 tenets, all of which you'll note are woven throughout my talk today. First, radical vendor neutrality. We don't sell software or accept corporate funding from software providers beyond the basic nonprofit discount. We keep our assistance strictly vendor neutral. Second, accessible cyber risk literacy. Because cyber risk cannot be outsourced, we are committed to helping nonprofit teams improve their cyber risk literacy as a core professional skill. We offer live training, one-on-one mentoring, and on-demand support for platform admins who manage the security for MS 365 or Google Workspace. We help nonprofits build values-based stewardship programs that respect their do-it-yourself spirit. We provide nonprofit leadership teams with strategic rubrics to manage cyber risk as a core governance priority. Third, strategic security planning. Cyber risk literacy enables nonprofits to self-manage risk and make informed decisions about their security. Even when you hire a vendor, the risk remains with your organization. We help organizations assess the risk, identify the assets that need protecting, adopt a security framework to guide protection and response efforts, and assist organizations with prioritizing what security gaps to fix first. Then our cybersecurity volunteers support them through the process of closing those gaps, whether that's a business process redesign or creating vendor selection criteria. Fourth is community cyber awareness. We offer free basic cybersecurity awareness training to fill the gap in affordable awareness resources for the nonprofit sector. We are dedicated to making high-quality basic awareness training at no cost to nonprofits. We currently offer free annual awareness training each October. Throughout the year, we also provide community awareness events for those who work with vulnerable populations, and you can learn more about our work at 501secure.org. As if you need a reminder, if you're on social media, you've probably noticed that it's Data Privacy Week. We are a proud data privacy champion. If you'd like to join the National Cybersecurity Alliance efforts to support awareness and data privacy, you can sign up your organization as a champion at staysafeonline.org. They also are a great source of free awareness training materials for these events each year, and you can take those and repurpose them throughout the year. It's a really great resource. So let's begin by looking at the tendency to treat cybersecurity as a technical chore. This is a frequent obstacle when starting an awareness program. It's common to think of it as something that belongs to the IT person, or it's as a line item that we'll get to once the actual work is done. But I think it's a category error that you have to correct in people's minds. If you're a nonprofit, your data includes the names of the vulnerable, and your biggest non-tangible assets are the trust of your donors and your institutional memory. When these are compromised, the ability to continue the work may be blocked or even disappear permanently. So why is it so hard for us to get this right? Is it a resource or a funding problem? Or is it a literacy problem? Or is it a deeper psychological problem where we've convinced ourselves that doing good somehow exempts us from the digital physics of the 21st century, where right now it's just rife with data pilots? I've sat in the room with many nonprofits over the last 3 years and found that the gap between being vulnerable and being secure isn't filled by phishing simulation subscriptions or EDR or even MFA, though all of these are important components of a modern security program. Rather, the gap is filled by the ability to read your organization, to see where mission continuity is at risk, where your team is overextended, where a single point of failure is being masked by a convenient process. In a word, it's finding clarity about what will move your organization from a state of unknown vulnerability to a state of managed risk. And that is the purpose of building an awareness program. It's asking questions such as, how do we measure awareness in a way that reflects behavior change? How do we choose tools when every vendor is promising a fix-all solution? And how do we build a cyber-aware culture that feels like an extension of our values rather than a burden on them? I want to suggest some ways of framing these questions in the context of the unique pressures facing nonprofits. Enterprise-grade security tools are useful and an important component of a security program, but nonprofits in particular benefit from a human-centered approach, principally because it's typical to hold multiple roles. Our orgs are trust-centered, and we're limited in terms of technology and training spend. So I am proposing a pathway that combines security, awareness, and compliance into a single sustainable, resource-efficient initiative. It's integrating technical controls and security behaviors into everyday work. It's participation and accountability that is intentionally distributed across the organization rather than assigned to a single person. It's adopting a shared security language. Security roles and responsibilities are named and specific, and everyone in the organization has one. Accountability activities are scheduled and regularly reviewed by leadership. Security as a standard professional practice becomes woven then into the everyday life of the organization, with mission resilience being the outcome, rather than demonstrated awareness, which I'll talk about the difference in a bit. So what do I mean by resilience? To build a cyber-aware organization, we have to understand that security and resilience are complementary concepts, but fundamentally different in their goals. The security side emphasizes prevention, while the resilience side emphasizes survival. So on the prevention piece, you're building a wall high enough to keep the bad actors out, but from the survival perspective, you're trying to ensure that the organization can take a hit and keep on serving the community. Security, you're either secure or compromised, versus resilience, where you're always in a state of prepared adaptation. Security handles the technical, it's the firewalls, the passwords, enabling encryption, and resilience is the holistic, view of processes, culture, leadership, and backup systems. Security can be brittle. When the wall is breached, security loses its integrity, while resilience can be grace under pressure. When a component fails, the mission continues because there's a manual backup. Security asks, how do we stop them from getting in? And resilience asks, how do we keep feeding, housing, helping people if the system is down? If we only focus on security, we are essentially blissfully living in a building vulnerable to a range of structural failures. But when we focus on resilience, we are adding responsiveness to our structure. The building sways in an earthquake, but it doesn't collapse. It's the realization that the earth will shift. There will be a breach, a vendor will go down, a staff member will make a mistake. Resilience is the integrated system of ownership and process that absorbs that shock and keeps the roof over our heads. We are acknowledging that life in the cloud means disruptions, from the benign to the potentially catastrophic. The job of conscious stewardship is not invincibility, it's durability. And I'm arguing that durability and the quantifiable reduction of security events are the only two measurable outcomes of an integrated security and awareness program that really matter. I've added to this talk insights from a 2-year case study of an anonymized nonprofit that transformed security from a peripheral task to a core institutional value. Though they had a $5 million budget and 45 employees, I'm sharing their story because their process is repeatable for any size organization. They moved from 0 security conversations to adopting a formal framework and building an incident response team. They used action learning, essentially staff-led tasks that identified priorities and built buy-in simultaneously. What they built was an integrated all-hands-on-deck culture where security, compliance, and awareness became one conversation. So if you look past their budget to their mechanics, there are low-cost ideas you can use to build your own awareness culture in this example. A budget buys tools, and a culture builds resilience, and you need both. So revisiting a concept from the previous slide, we commonly treat cybersecurity as a technical chore. It isn't. It is an essential component of the invisible scaffolding of our work. You cannot have sustained impact without resilience. I want to challenge the way we talk about our work. We measure our success by the quantifiable result, the meals served, the cases closed, the lives changed, but there is a silent partner in all of those outcomes. It's the data that we hold. If we reframe our organizations not just as service providers, but as stewards of the digital lives of the vulnerable, our perspective on security tasks starts to shift from a chore or inconvenience to a moral obligation and an expression of high professional standards. When an organization achieves a shift in perspective like this, it marks a major milestone on its awareness journey. So there's a persistent myth that security is a destination that you reach. In reality, it's an ongoing project requiring a series of trade-offs between friction and safety. So where is your organization currently choosing convenience over resilience? It's easier and faster to get into an account without MFA, but it's a risk. And is that a choice you made consciously or by default? We hear often about how technical tools fail because of human systems. When you think about your team, is cyber awareness seen as a core competency of being a nonprofit professional? Or is it still treated as a distraction from the real work? And on fairness to that point, part of building an awareness culture is defining what that competency looks like. There's also a lot of shame associated with digital vulnerability. How do we shift internal culture from one of blame, hey, who clicked that link, to one of systems thinking? Why was that link able to cause so much damage in the first place? A market is saturated at this moment with consultants and software solutions that promise basically set it and forget it type safety. How do you develop the internal rubric to judge a solution's efficacy without being a computer scientist? What are your organization's 3 non-negotiables before signing a vendor contract or clicking accept on the terms of service agreement? In policy, we say what gets measured gets managed, but how do you measure a disaster that didn't happen beyond just completion rates for training? And what does a secure culture actually look like in your day-to-day operations? Answering these fundamental questions requires a clear-eyed assessment of your organization's current state, its technology, data, and cultural maturity. Moving to the next level requires updating technical security and business processes and integrating those updates with a human-centered approach to awareness. In other words, our efforts to identify and close security gaps becomes an awareness resource that we can use to mobilize teams to develop internal systems of ownership, accountability, and mutual defense. When we involve the entire team, volunteers, contractors, board members, and staff, in a whole organization project where everyone owns a specific security task, something profound happens. We shift the culture away from a hollow, compliance-oriented awareness toward a functional reality of active stewardship and cooperation. If we're going to move our organizations forward, we need a common language to describe it. The SANS Institute provides this cybersecurity awareness maturity model, basically a roadmap for the evolution of an organization. Most of us start at the bottom, and not because we don't care, but because we haven't yet built the systems to sustain the work. This was true of our case study organization. Think about your organization's awareness capacity, not where you'd like your org to be, but where your organization actually is today. Where does your organization currently sit on the awareness maturity scale? Is it non-existent? There's no formal awareness program yet. You rely probably on luck and hoping that your staff naturally is cautious. Are you in that second level, the compliance focused? You don't have annual training, or you do have annual training, but it's an external force that is motivating that? Or are you kind of in that third area where you've gone beyond annual training videos, you're sending out monthly tips, you're trying to change people's daily habits? Those that are on that farther end of the maturity scale, security becomes a shared value for them. It's a part of their onboarding process. It's discussed in team meetings and leadership models, the behavior for everyone. It just becomes the way that you do things. At the highest level of the SANS awareness, you're actually collecting data. You're using evidence-based training, and you're moving in a direction where you're constantly adjusting and refining based on the data that you collect and the conversations you have with your team. This is a very informal attitudinal assessment. In the model, we're moving from the ad hoc reactive state toward the cultural state where security is simply a part of the institutional DNA. And we'll send a link to download the SANS Maturity Model Toolkit with our follow-up email. It's free. It's an opt-in, but it's worth sharing your email and name for. So most likely you've probably found your organization hovering between compliance and awareness. You have the intent, but we haven't yet achieved the integrated awareness, and this is where most nonprofits currently fall. So what does integration look like? First, being a cyber aware organization requires a shared language, a values-based why for engaging in secure behaviors and completing trainings and so on, and concrete actions such as inventorying technology and data, and then prioritizing security interventions and making a plan for implementation. For example, security is viewed through the lens of your values. If you serve vulnerable populations, then data privacy becomes a matter of social justice. You cannot defend everything, so you use an inventory of your organization's assets and processes and compliance responsibilities, and combine that with industry recognized framework. like NIST or CIS, to focus on what is most important to protect. And in the follow-up email, we'll send some information links on those two frameworks for you to take a look at if you're curious. It also looks like making a plan. Your strategy should be independent of your tools. A tool or a vendor is a tactic. A strategy is a system of security, ideally with several layers, all which must be supported by leadership and your team. Use the process of implementing your plan and measuring its outcomes as an engine of awareness and cultural change. A hands-on project distributed across teams gets the conversation going in a way that formal training alone cannot. When we talk about cybersecurity awareness, we rely on a seductive logic. More information leads to better choices, which leads to more secure systems. Independent research challenges this, however. A 2025 study by Ho and colleagues involving 19,500 employees at a healthcare organization found no empirical evidence that traditional phishing simulations prevent security incidents. This study is a hot topic right now because it challenges the status quo, but it's not the first study to have drawn this conclusion, which actively contradicts most vendor-written white papers. Similarly, in 2025, Chetri did a meta-study that found no evidence that traditional training changes the behavior that leads to security events. And research by Lane and colleagues published in 2022 found that environmental cues like warning labels and report phish button integrated into a work environment, like say, the report button that's on the top of Outlook, for example. Anyway, those are far more effective than traditional trainings at preventing security incidents. Vendors measure improved attitudes or reporting rates, but reporting a simulation is not the same as preventing a security event. They have become excellent at measuring demonstrated awareness, for example, not clicking on a phishing test, but they fail to prove that not clicking a simulated email makes organizations safer. So where does that leave us? I think that we have to drop the shame-based model of fixing the human and look at what awareness is actually for. If we can't definitively say that training reduces incidents, and the data from Ho suggests we can't, maybe we should be looking at resilience. Awareness isn't a shield, it's a diagnostic tool, right? The value isn't necessarily in preventing the click, but in shortening the time between the endangering event and the response. If we accept that passive awareness trainings alone don't prevent security events, it points to the need for an integrated approach, one where technical security and active stewardship are entwined. It starts with a clinical audit of your reality. Our case organization began with an inventory of their data, devices, and processes and compliance responsibilities, and then asked, if this specific piece was compromised tomorrow, what is the actual cost to our mission? This is a prioritization exercise that any organization can do, but it is especially well suited for smaller organizations of 50 people or less. It gets into the heart of building awareness on a shoestring. Just this exercise alone will organically raise awareness and make security concerns directly relevant to your team. So first, what are assets? Assets are knowledge, tools, and processes primarily. So tools can be software, hardware, cloud accounts. Your knowledge are your documents, your databases. It can be image files. And your processes are those that are critical to providing the essential functions of your organization. That can be sending an email, doing payroll, or processing donations, for example. Here's an example, we'll show you what this looks like, of a basic inventory sheet. There are fancy softwares out there that can round up your data and categorize it and give you a report on, how much of it is sensitive and restricted and confidential and internal. But a spreadsheet is a conversational focal point, which is why this exercise is well suited to small organizations with small budgets. And not all of your data lives on the same platform. You need conversations to build trust, which leads to discoveries about where data actually lives. I think that the idea of taking your spreadsheet and crowdsourcing your inventory as a basis of starting a conversation around awareness. Just thinking of an example of an org that I worked with where they had 17 people and they did this process and they discovered more than just where data was living. For example, when it came to their team, they found that everyone was basically making a copy of the spreadsheet and putting it on their laptops because they didn't understand how to use SharePoint, where you have a single document that is sort of your primary source of truth. But this document also had social security numbers in it. So there was like 16 copies of this social security laden spreadsheet around. So it illuminated some inefficiencies, it illuminated a lack of skills, it illuminated just the lack of security around that. Started the conversation, where do we need these social security numbers to be? And they actually determined that that spreadsheet didn't need them and they removed them. This is the power of building awareness through just a crowdsourced activity. I'm very excited about it and like to share this idea because it's so simple, but yet and cheap, but yet useful. Our case study org established first an incident response team, used the data inventory to guide their security efforts, which led to policies, organizational relevant trainings on safety and specific behaviors, which would include procedures, for example, to follow during financial transactions, and establishing a security role and activities for all members of the organization. One of the biggest points of ineffectiveness I see is the single point of failure. One person is expected to carry the entire weight of an organization's digital safety. That is a security event waiting to happen. Leadership must define the checks and balance system that evaluates security and awareness so that the weight of that is distributed. And a leader doesn't have to be a techie to do this, just informed and involved. Establishing roles and teams to support an integrated program can be an effective way to distribute responsibility, accountability, and awareness. Think about it like establishing a volunteer fire department. So let's look at the roles our case study organization established. So there's the resource owner, which is basically anyone who has an admin privileges for a platform or a SaaS subscription service that they've got the ability to add users, to adjust privileges. Their responsibility as a resource owner can be made explicit in terms of looking at logs or activity. Is there a lot of download activity, or someone's logging in from Zimbabwe, or they're also responsible for keeping up on the changes on the platform and using the security tools that come with that service in an effective manner. Data steward is a role that everyone in an organization can have. This includes responsibilities for cyber hygiene, which I'll mention later or talk about later. But also just the baseline responsibilities for putting data into the database or device safety, and nobody in the organization is exempt. So it expands that conversation to everyone instead of just, a handful of people that may be considered responsible for security. And then there's the incident response team. So you need a group of people, some internal, maybe you have a vendor for technical heavy lifting, who meet specifically to map out the what ifs. These are the people who are the keepers of a holistic view of institutional survival. So they're going to make a communication plan in the event of an incident. Who's going to tell the donors, who's going to tell the board. There's the legal obligations. What are those and who's handling them? There's business continuity. If our email is offline, how do we communicate with our clients and with each other? Incident response, they have a plan, they've rehearsed it, and they guide the response for the organization. In the case study org, they met monthly for the first year and then adjusted their time. They also became awareness and security champions for the organization. And this is true of both resource owners and the IR team because they will spend more time learning about security and preparedness. And establishing those champions early on in the process is what really expands awareness organically. So here's some great things that you can create from a crowdsourced asset inventory project. So first of all, it's your reference and working document about what you currently have and what you need to protect and what status it is, what kinds of data are leaving the organization, what kinds of data are coming in, where are they stored, who's using it, what kind of sensitivity, that kind of thing. It's a terrific training and awareness opportunity, as I've mentioned, just putting this together. If you are a small organization, a basic spreadsheet that you are distributing and with some instructions on how to add your data and your assets to the inventory list starts an organic conversation and reveals all kinds of interesting things about where your data is and how it's used. Once you have your inventory filled out, it becomes the basis for creating policies. Now you know which data you need to protect and where it lives. Maybe you need to move it. Maybe you need to restrict access to it. It becomes that framework that you use to sort of guide the best practices to kind of lock things down. And eventually, hopefully, you're putting that in writing and you're communicating it to your team. It becomes a tool for adapting an industry recognized cybersecurity framework. So if you are at the point where you're mature enough that you're needing to be accountable to funders, want to demonstrate that you are compliant with their security requests, having a framework in place is pretty handy. And the basis of that is an inventory. Once you have the start of a framework, you're adapting that, you can easily show where you are in your progression in terms of compliance. It also assists with succession planning. If you've got a accurate asset inventory, you've got something you can hand to leadership, to the new person who's handling the security. It's a pretty nice communication tool. It guides security incident recovery. So this gives you a sense of what you had before something bad happened. And it's just a living document that is there for reference. You're hopefully constantly updating it if you've got big changes. We're not talking about putting every single spreadsheet or every document in. It's more about groups and what lives in folders or what lives in Dropbox versus people's OneDrives or SharePoint. Finally, we have to address the budget excuse. So we often think we can't be secure because we can't afford the latest enterprise grade dashboard. Microsoft is just full of useful but too expensive security tools, for example. Regardless, most of us are sitting on untapped options within the platforms we already pay for, or we aren't using basic cybersecurity hygiene that decades of industry incident data tells us neutralizes the vast majority of common threats. Cyber hygiene is low cost and effective. Affordances are built into most of the commercial platforms and SaaS subscriptions that nonprofits typically use. Things like MFA, using unique long passphrases, identity management. This is where your team members have their own accounts. You're not sharing, one giant Dropbox, for example. Conditional access. These platforms have the MS365 and Workspace, for example. You can restrict access to those platforms if the device doesn't have password enabled on the lock screen or the operating system isn't updated, for example. You can limit access to sensitive data and platforms to just the people who need them. Now that you have your inventory filled out and everyone's sort of talking about what they found, then you've got the ability to say, okay, this is where these files are going to live and only certain folks can access them. Anti-malware on devices is really non-negotiable. This is particularly true for personal Android devices. Using security settings available on the platforms in use. Protocols for requesting and approving financial transactions. So what are your processes? Again, doesn't cost money, just takes some conversations and some coordination. Backups and recovery testing, super important. Regularly logging out of accounts and clearing your browser cache and keeping your software updated. If you don't have the budget for automation or outsourced vendor services, you've got to substitute it with intentionality. Your resource owners use manual observation, for example, right? Your platform admins, they audit permissions, they look at logs for suspicious logins and activity. Data stewards, which is everyone, they practice basic cyber hygiene. It's a collective effort, and it's a way of saying that our mission is too important to just leave to chance. So I hope I've provided you with some ideas to consider and take back to your organizations. We're going to send out links to all of the resources. That it'll have slides in them as well, so I can share the deck with you. Thank you for dropping in.